Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of my Boomer Buddies podcast, telling it like it was and is. I'm your host, Rick Reed. In today's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about Halloween. Now, this is going to publish the day before Halloween and run for a few days after. When you see this, I want you to reminisce about back in the day, Halloween, what you did, what it meant to you. Let's see how Halloween got started way back when. Halloween originated from the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, which celebrated the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of a dark, cold winter. The Catholic Church later incorporated some of these traditions into All Saints' Day, November 1st, with the night before becoming All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween. The holiday was brought to America by Irish and other European immigrants, and later American culture added elements like trick-or-treating and carved pumpkins. Now, as a boomer, I can recall getting excited about Halloween because it meant that little fear of going out in the dark. We went out in groups most of the time until we got older, but that anticipation of what kind of candy or what you're going to get in that bucket or bag of yours, that kept your heart pumping, and the excitement got later and you dumped out everything in there to see what kind of loot you got. At first, when I trick-or-treated, I went with some of the other neighborhood kids, and there was usually an adult not too far away, but we didn't want them too close. And we would go to the neighbors and see what they got. You always were able to tag which houses had the best stuff. And if you ran into another group of trick-or-treaters, you could steer them to a house or away from a house. I know that Grandma and Grandpa Bachman across the street, they had the full-size Hershey candy bars. So that was a go-to place. And then other places that gave apples and things like that. You know, you're a kid, you want candy. You don't really want apples, do you? What are some of your memories? Think about that. I had a buddy, Greg Michelson. He's 3 years older than me, and he would go off on his own. And he was young and strong. I think he was like 13 years old. He would go to a lot of neighborhoods, and he would give me a really good tip on what to use for a bag or a container to collect the candy. Because he was going to 4 or 5 neighborhoods, he brought a pillowcase, so he could really haul the loot in that pillowcase and make good time. And he went by himself. Now, by the time I went by myself, I followed in his footsteps, but of course, he wasn't trick-or-treating anymore. When I turned 13, that was my peak year and my last year of trick-or-treating. And I knew where to go by then from year to year. You knew that Mrs. McCoy would have homemade popcorn balls, which were really good. So you wanted to make sure you hit her. And then I won't say the names of the houses where you wanted to avoid, but you still went there just to see if maybe they changed up and got better candy or items to put into your bag. So trick-or-treating was a lot of fun. And I had 5 other siblings. I was the oldest, so sometimes I'd have to take them for a while just to watch over them. And then I'd dump them off, and then I'd go ahead to the other neighborhoods. Fond memories of trick-or-treating. And I'm curious, what are your memories? Go ahead and comment. If you're on YouTube, just comment below. If you are listening to this episode on Buzzsprout or Spotify, go ahead and comment there, and I'll be sure to see that. Just curious what you did for trick-or-treating. Now, another thing about trick-or-treating were the costumes. It's kind of interesting. I remember back as a kid, you would have something simple as a sheet you'd put over your head with eyes and a mouth cut out and maybe darken around where the eyes are and go out and do that. We usually went down to Ben Franklin and we would buy a mask, a plastic mask with the elastic, and then maybe there would be a costume with it. But most of the time you just had to do your own costume or just layer up. Being a Minnesotan up here, it got pretty cold. So a lot of times it was just a plain mask that you would go with as your costume. But historically, it's kind of interesting. In the 50s, the main costume was to be a cowboy. You know, you would have the cowboy hat, the handkerchief or kerchief around your neck. You might have a vest on, maybe some cowboy boots. But that was the big thing in the 50s for boys to have as a costume. The girls would be a fairy princess, something along those lines. Pretty simple costumes. And then when you get into the 60s, 1968, the most popular costume was Casper the Friendly Ghost. Remember that, boomers? 69 was a big year for Elvis. I know he had the 68 comeback special, and that prompted a lot of Elvis costumes after that. 1970, the Beatles. It's kind of the last hurrah for them. Another costume favorite in 71 was Willy Wonka. Remember? And then in 72, a lot of people went as the Godfather. And then in 73, a favorite was Jan Brady from the Brady Bunch. 74, Easy Buchanan from the Great Gatsby movie was a popular one for the women. And then in 1975, the most popular costume was the shark from Jaws. Remember? All right, so those were the costumes. And I know that most of you out there probably stopped by age 12 or 13 trick-or-treating. But to get the most mileage out of trick-or-treating, 13 was probably the last and top as your peak year. Now, I would like to shift gears a little bit and talk about horror films in general. I know when I was younger, it was kind of cool to be scared, and there were certain genres that you would follow in horror. And there were some different genres that I absolutely hated to watch, but let's talk about that now, shall we? One type of horror film was the psychological horror, and that focused on the mental and emotional states of characters, often exploring themes of sanity, fear, and the unknown. This genre creates tension through suspense and character development rather than relying on gore. Notable examples of the psychological horror genre is Psycho in a movie Get Out, for example. I remember Psycho, my mom was watching Psycho by herself. All us kids were in bed, and my dad worked late on Friday nights. And if it was on network TV, that was probably the way most people watched that. Well, she actually let me come out and sit with her and watch it. I remember that. And that was so suspenseful and scary. And I'm glad that I could help my mom not be too terrified as well. So that's psychological horror. Let's talk about Gothic horror. Now, that was really fun when you were a little kid. Gothic horror combines elements of romance and horror, often featuring dark settings, supernatural elements, just a spooky air about it. Some classics from the Gothic are Dracula, Frankenstein. That exemplified that genre, and it delved into the human psyche and social fears. Comedy horror. That was really fun for a kid because you saw the Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein. And then all of a sudden you get these blends of humor and creating a unique experience that elicits both the laughs and scares. And I remember Abbott and Costello, horror gothic monsters with them, as did Abbott and Costello meets the Wolfman or Frankenstein. And then you also had later on, as we grew up, us boomers, we had Young Frankenstein. To this day, one of my favorites. And they used the actual set from the 1930s, the original Frankenstein movie. I found that really well. Mel Brooks, wow, great job with that one. And great actors that you brought in to keep the spirit of it, but great humor. Oh, so good. And then you had the supernatural horror, which is really scary to me. It had elements beyond the natural world, such as ghosts, demons, and unworldly things. This conjured up and explored themes of fear of the unknown and the afterlife, with popular examples being The Conjuring, The Exorcist, and The Shining. And then another genre, a fifth one, is the slashing horror. The slashing horror films featured a killer stalking and murdering a group of people, often with graphic violence. This genre became popular in the late 20th century with films like Halloween. And another one that was kind of similar to that was Zombies. That could also be kind of supernatural. I remember seeing Night of the Living Dead. That was a very low budget movie in the late 60s, and it scared the heck out of me as a 10-year-old. But also, it's like watching a chain wreck. you kept watching it, but that was pretty scary. They would have creature feature night on Saturday nights, and I can remember seeing that movie on there. And then there was another one that I saw actually in college. It was from 1957 originally, and that was Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which there were aliens that took over your bodies. There was a pod, and people would leave that pod by you, and then when you slept, it would take over your body. And now that was you. You were basically a zombie alien. That one was really good. Seeing it as a 18-year-old in college, they featured that movie, and it was so well done. Kevin McCarthy played the doctor there, and he had this beautiful fiance, and all the townspeople were being taken over and over, and he didn't, and he was in fear. He had the close-ups with the big eyes, and then all of a sudden, his fiance became one of them. What a terrifying moment to know that your best friend neighbors who were everything to you, you did everything with them, socializing, and all of a sudden they are taken over. And it's just very scary. And it was done later, I think in the 80s, late 80s, maybe mid 80s, taken over, and Donald Sutherland took the part. And the way they used to alert everybody as to somebody who wasn't taken over, they'd go, a lot of suspense. But that was one that really scared me, but I wasn't creeped out by it as far as body parts and gore. Those were the genres of the horror films. What was your favorite? Did you like horror films at all? Somewhat? Pick out one, let me know what you think. I really, really enjoyed the comedy ones, like Young Frankenstein, for example. That was really a good comedy one. The Abbott Costello was a favorite for comedy movies. And it was always funny to see how the makeup was very well done, just like it was in the 30s for the Wolfman movies, Frankenstein, Dracula, very good ones. If you had favorites, please let me know as well. Go ahead and comment. Absolutely loved the Halloween season just because it's cool to be outside, really, kind of the first time out trick or treating. Normally you couldn't go out in the dark. And then gradually, as you got older, you could play in the dark and play those night games, hide and seek at night. Halloween helped introduce being able to do that. And each year got a little cooler and cooler and cooler. And then you couldn't do it anymore. Now, modern day trick or treating, I do want to talk about that. I still love to hand out candy. I still love that whole excitement of Halloween and seeing these little kids for the first time going out with their parents standing down on the sidewalk, letting their kids go up and having to prompt them to say trick or treat. Now I'm a grandfather, and I love it even more seeing that happen. And I can remember taking my daughter and my two sons out when they were little, and the excitement they had and the cool costumes that they had. They had costumes like Rubik's Cube. My youngest was a Rubik's Cube, and that got a lot of comments from the people handing out candy at the door, and they got a few extra pieces of candy for that. And my other son, he got some glow sticks and taped it to black. He had a black hoodie on, black pants, and basically made a circle for the face. So he was a stick man, a neon stick man, and that was pretty clever. And even as an adult, my wife and I, we went to a company party, and we found a costume where you have false legs. You do false legs on the front. You're covered up in black on the bottom. And it looked like we were both being taken by an alien. We had above us a fake head up there with a mask on from an alien. And then we had our real arms, and it looked like the alien had us around the waist. And well, I'll drop a picture in if you're watching on YouTube. And you had your real legs down below covered up by a robe, and it was really an effective costume. Anyway, that won best costume at the company party. Halloween, it can be fun for the young and the adults, and it's cool to see how people have evolved over the years. What I do find now, the older kids, they come in from other neighborhoods. They come in cars and they're dropped off. And some are way older than 13, and they don't even say trick or treat anymore. And I just stand there, and they stand there. They put their bag out, and I go, well, trick or treat. call them kids, but the older ones. So I think some of them even shave and then they get in the cars and they go. And, it kind of irritates my wife a bit. And I just say they're out having fun. And as long as they're not doing anything bad, I don't mind giving a few extra pieces of candy out. Lord knows I don't need it. Anyway, that's a boomer look back at Halloween and the origins of it. I've heard some people just don't like it. They think it's pagan and all that. I think it's just a fun time for kids, young and old, and even some grandparents out there. And I know some parents enjoy it as well. Well, that was a boomer buddy look back at Halloween. And for this old Halloween guy, I want to wish you happy Halloween and think about some good times, some good memories, some good people you celebrated it with who may not be here anymore, but you have those memories. For my Boomer Buddies podcast, I'm Rick Reed. Until next time, we'll see you around the block. Boo.